I don't really want to be a news channel, but sometimes something happens that I just need to talk about. And I don't know, if like 50 cards get banned in Legacy at the same time, I should probably make a video on it. Alright, so I don't have to interrupt the flow of the video later. Let me just start by saying that this video is sponsored by TOAmagic.com. That's Tales of Adventures. And if you find that this wave of bannings has shaken up your deck and you need some new cards, TOAmagic.com should have just about everything that you need in stock. You want free shipping? They got that. You want everything in one envelope from one vendor? They got that. And should you find that you need to craft some new deck lists, please consider moxfield.com. Moxfield has hosted all of my decks for the last couple of years. I think I probably have 500 decks up on their site by now, and I don't think I could endorse them any more strongly than by doing that. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher, aka ThrabenU here for another Legacy video. And today, that is May 13th, a large number of cards were banned in Legacy at the same time. Notably for the format, Sticker Goblin is going to be exiting, which is a really, really big deal. Like, maybe even metagame changing big deal. Let's start by looking at the article itself that talks about what happened. So, in Legacy, Vintage, and Pauper, all cards that bring a sticker or an attraction into the game are now banned. So between those two sets of cards, it's roughly 50 cards. I didn't take the time to count out exactly how many, but all of those cards are exiting the format at the same time. And the Legacy and Vintage blurb is basically the same. And what really matters is kind of talking about Unfinity. So, as a reminder, the Unfinity set was very strange. It was very much an experiment in trying to make some of the cards from these sets eternal legal while keeping the more ridiculous ones of them out of constructed formats. Now, some of the cards from the Unfinity set are perfectly normal, playable Magic the Gathering cards that just like make a lot of sense and easily could have been printed in a set that, wasn't kind of for fun and wasn't for like self-parody. And Comet is a great example of that. But the sticker and attraction cards actually ended up creating quite a few problems for the format. And this is where we ran into some major problems with Sticker Goblin. The sticker stuff was not something that was baked into Magic's history. That's not something that Magic Online was capable of doing in its current form. And so the Sticker Goblin that you see on screen here involved a roll of a d20, and it was a pretty decent approximation of how the card actually worked in paper. There were some differences, like they were functionally completely different cards despite sharing the same name, but it was good enough to get the job done. But one of the first things that this article addresses is that if you're playing any sort of deck with a Phyrexian Metamorph effect, some sort of clone effect of any kind, you kind of need to show up with the sticker sheet. And that was creating a very awkward environment where people might be incentivized to have sticker sheets or have attraction decks and present them before games, and it made tournaments just kind of physically awkward in a way that's not really fun and in a way that kind of bogs down tournaments. So they kind of treated this as an experiment and then realized, like, okay, we got too lost in the sauce. We maybe shouldn't do this again. So very few of these cards actually reach the caliber of Legacy playable. Sticker Goblin is the primary one, although occasionally you will see some decks like maybe Nick Fit or some other kind of spicy brews messing around with some of the things like the Most Dangerous Gamer and Deadbeat Attendant that can go and open up these attractions. So this is kind of a big deal. This is a banning that is not being done based on power level. Sticker Goblin, Blank Goblin has become a reasonable card to play in Legacy. Note that this is not a power level ban. This is kind of a tournament logistics ban, and maybe to some extent, this is something that is helping to unite paper Magic and Magic Online, because these sticker decks and attractions are just not working on Magic Online. I'll throw down for Daybreak Games here. They have done an absolutely awesome job of getting stuff to Magic Online that has come out since they have had control of the program. Occasionally there's some weird licensing things, and we run into some issues with some of the stuff like Warhammer 40k or Doctor Who, but generally speaking, they've made stuff work, and they've done a great job with the platform. But some of this stuff is legitimately tough to do. And I'm going to go to my own website for a second. Jacob P sent me a donation deck list for an attraction deck multiple years ago at this point, and we were all just kind of waiting, assuming that attractions would come to Magic Online. But it seems like that maybe is not going to be the case now, because they're not tournament viable anymore. They're just gone. Jacob, if you see this, shoot me an email. Let's talk. Now, before we get into talking about the implications of this ban, because I think they are quietly a very big deal, we do also get a little bit more info about Legacy, as this was a sort of regularly planned ban and restricted update. So with this banning, they are expecting a small shakeup. And I agree with this. This is actively going to change the metagame, especially sideboards, in my opinion. But they are keeping an eye on Orcish Bowmasters and Grief. They are aware of the problem, if there is a problem, and it's maybe unclear whether or not there is. There are very strong and polarizing opinions about what should be done with these cards. I did a podcast episode, I think somewhat recently, about that. Joe Dyer of MTG Goldfish put together a roundtable that kind of goes into it a lot. So there's more resources out there if you want to kind of talk about that stuff in more detail. But historically, Modern Horizon sets have had the ability to influence Legacy. Yes, they have. So we'll see how the format evolves as it absorbs Modern Horizons 3. And this is an opinion that I very, very strongly agree with. And this was something that I wrote in Joe Dyer's article when I was in it. I essentially said that if there's a card in Legacy that's bannable, it's probably Grief, but that we should wait to see what happens with Modern Horizons 3, because the metagame is not going to change. It is probably going to upend. It is probably going to be massively different. So thumbs up, big fan of what's happening here. But now let's take a look at the implications of banning all of these cards. And the focus here is obviously going to be on Name Sticker Goblin, as this was a major pillar of the Legacy format. So I think when a lot of people first read this announcement, their thought is going to be, okay, Goblins is dead. That's not that big of a change. But I think to view the announcement in that way is to underestimate how much of a stranglehold Name Sticker Goblin kind of quietly has on the format. Because I think the format has changed around this card. Not in a negative way, but Name Sticker Goblin being in the format just meant that you needed to be able to interact with a Name Sticker Goblin immediately the turn that it came down, or the game would massively change. And with the rise of Name Sticker Goblin, we saw the rise of Battlecry Goblin. With Name Sticker Goblin, it's very easy to just go and think, hey, this is your way to get to Muxus. And that's how people first started building these decks. And then everyone realized how cracked it is to just get 6 mana off Name Sticker Goblin, cast Battlecry Goblin, activate twice, swing, and your opponent is either dead that turn or dead the next turn. So I want to talk about that idea more a little bit later. But before I do anything else, I want to establish that, like, when Name Sticker Goblins goes, it's not one deck that dies. The deck that I have on screen right now is kind of your traditional Turbo Muxus Goblin Stompy deck list. But the format has been sort of subtly changing a little bit, where you have builds of this deck that are various degrees of Stompy. So we started to see Chalice of the Void floating in and out of this deck list, as well as some other prison pieces. You know, sometimes it's a Thorn of Amethyst, sometimes it's Magus of the Moon, sometimes it's Unlicensed Hearse, but we start to see people messing around with these alternative builds. And some of these builds would not just like play some lock pieces, but they would even go so far as to have an alternative mid-range plan of the One Ring, which could do things like provide a turn of fogging against a Merit Lage token or another large threat like Murktide Regent, while also serving as a source of card advantage in the mid-game. And sometimes you can do the mid-game starting on turn 1 because Ancient Tomb goes burr. And while the focus of Namesticker Goblin was always on this Turbo Muxus Stompy deck list, there were perfectly reasonable Aether Vial builds that still took advantage of Namesticker Goblin. Like, despite the fact that, like, Namesticker Goblin is better when you are just trying to go fast and get those kills and shove those wins, Namesticker Goblin was still just perfectly fine as a thing to, you know, use with Goblin Matron to set things up over multiple turns. And tapping your Aether Vial to generate at least 4 mana instead of like using 3 mana to at least go +1 on mana from there. Like tapping an Aether Vial to just go 4 to 6 mana immediately rather than using part of that as a part of the cost of Namesticker Goblin is kind of a big deal. What this banning does at the same time is get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this, and just simultaneously remove all of that from the format at the same time. And that is something that is going to be worth digging into. And I think this is the point where we should start talking about the metagame as it is now, and the metagame that is likely to start emerging very quickly in the next couple of days here. So let's start with right now, and I'm going to use 2 different sets of numbers here. The first is from MTG Top 8, and we can see that Goblins is at about 7% of the format here. And 7% does not sound like a lot. Like, that does not sound like a big number. But when you start looking at these other decks, like Delver, like when you look at these things that are going to be Delver total is about 12% of the metagame. Maybe not counting things like the blue-black scam, the Rescaminator deck that often kind of get shoved into this category down here. And when you look at like the various control deck lists, like lands and 5-color control are around 5% of the format. Most of the combo decks are at like 3%, if even that. 7% is pretty much the largest single number here you see outside of the various Reanimator decks. So, like, by this metric, the format is losing one of the most popular decks. And you just see this Namesticker Goblin deck, this Turbo Muxus deck in leagues absolutely all the time. So let's go over to MTG Goldfish now and do the same comparison over there. Like we see on MTG Top 8, the Reanimator, the Rescaminator decks make up the largest portion of the singular metagame share right now. And Teamer Delver, which it has blue-red symbols for, but our blue-red or Teamer Delver decks plus our Grixis Delver decks end up at a slightly larger metagame share here at about 15% versus 12%, but it's painting the same general picture, right? And the Beanstalk control decks are 7% here as opposed to 5% on the other site, and Goblins are still running in at about 7%. So again, we are losing one of the top decks of the format, not just in terms of power level, but also in terms of metagame percentage. And if we are pulling a major pillar out of the format, something else has to replace that. So, what I want to do now is talk about what changes are we likely to see immediately and what changes are we likely to see over time. Okay, so I think it's very easy to start with Battlecry Goblin here. So, Battlecry Goblin is a card that existed for a while. It's from some set. Nobody knows what set symbols are anymore, so I'm not even going to venture a guess. But it was out a while, and I basically did not see this card at all until Sticker Goblin hit Magic Online. And then overnight, this card just was absolutely everywhere. This is a okay power level card. Like it has a strong ability. It's on a 2/2 body, so it doesn't immediately die to an Orcish Bowmaster ping or anything like that. And this allows a Goblins deck to pump some mana into it and do disgusting things. But Sticker Goblin was a major part of making this card good. So as a starting point, I expect to see a little bit less Battlecry Goblin in the format moving forward. It's still a perfectly reasonable card to put into a Goblins deck, but Sticker Goblin was really the thing that made this shine. So I'm expecting to see a bit less of this in whatever the Goblin decks look like moving forward. I am sure conversation has already started on the Goblins Discord, so that is a place that I would direct you to if you are interested in how the deck is going to change moving forward. I'm going to just make up a number here. If Goblins is currently 7% of the metagame right now, I might expect it to drop by like 4%. I think Goblins is going to become a deck that is still perfectly viable. You would not be embarrassed to be playing Goblins. Broadside is still cracked. Muxus is still cracked. None of that is going to change. But the deck slows down and I think becomes a reasonable legacy deck instead of just clearly one of the better things to be doing in the format. And because this deck's metagame share is going to go down so much, it'll probably be half, if not less than what it is. It's going to be a lot less than it is right now. I didn't say that well. Because it is going to decrease in play so much, the things that people are currently using to respect this deck are going to go down in numbers drastically. And I think the easiest way to show you how much people are respecting this deck as of right now is to just show you a quick look at some of the most played cards in the format. So, for example, when we look at the most played cards in Legacy, number 5 is Hydroblast, as of right now. Yes, a targeted anti-red card is up there with Force of Will, Brainstorm, Ponder, and Force of Negation. This is how good these Sticker Goblin decks were. People absolutely just had to have these efficient answers for Sticker Goblin. And so I think Hydroblast is going to go from this super necessary card in blue sideboards to a thing that is going to float in and out of play as the weeks go on. Similarly, I believe Pyrokinesis is currently number 25 on the list of most commonly played spells in Legacy. And the reason is that this is a card that while you are tapped out, you can use to kill a Sticker Goblin in response to its ETB trigger so that they don't get the mana. And there was this very long conversation of, are you supposed to play Pyrokinesis or are you supposed to be playing Fury in these red decks? And Fury is a 3/3 double striker. That's Still a pretty respectable Magic the Gathering card, even if the, deal 4 damage when it enters the battlefield part isn't relevant. But being instant speed so you could stop name Sticker Goblins was such a big deal that the fact that this didn't come attached to a 3/3 body often didn't matter. And it's kind of crazy. So, Pyrokinesis is a card that I would expect to see a little bit less of, and I would expect to see a little bit more Fury moving forward, as now the necessity of instant speed goes down a lot. And Pyrokinesis isn't the only card of this nature. Many decks started playing Dismember, even if they didn't have black mana in them, just because they needed something that either for free or for 1 mana could just very consistently answer Name Sticker Goblin and all of the other creatures that were coming out at roughly the same time as them. So while I'm not gonna say, oh, there's going to be less Dismember in the format, because this is just such a generically good card that I would just expect this to be floating around the format, people are not necessarily going to need to play as many early game answers to creatures. That is like the Dismembers, the Pyrokinesis, the thing of those general natures. You can have a little bit more breathing room. You can have a little bit more setup time than what you had previously moving forward. And I guess at this point, let's start going to the prediction stage of what I think the metagame is going to look like moving forward, what I expect to see more of, what I expect to see less of. So let's start with the info for you red gamers out there. So let's say that you own all of these cards, you have a paper tournament coming up, how do you use all these ancient tombs and these red cards that you've accumulated over the last couple of years? You can probably build a serviceable Goblins deck that will still be fine, but you'll probably notice a real power level gap between what you could do a week ago and what you can do now. So I think many of the players who enjoy the play patterns of these Turbo Muxus decks are going to shift back to the Moon Stompy decks. And these decks are still perfectly fine. They are still quite powerful. I grabbed one of Sahar's builds that she posted on Twitter. This is an idea of something that you could do. Super briefly talking about a couple of the card choices here. I am not sure whether or not you actually want to max out on 4 copies of Unlicensed Hearse, but Brief Reanimate is all over the format. There's a lot of Murktide Regent all over the format. I can understand wanting to approach the format in this way. And I have mixed feelings about Stingerback Terror. I have seen it do some good things. I have seen it be incredibly slow and clunky. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I expect that this will be a serious contender in the metagame again, rather than okay, is this well positioned for this specific weekend? Do I have a reason not to play Turbo Muxus? So I expect to see more of this. So next up, Turbo Muxus was doing this kind of terrible thing where it was just faster than most of the other fair decks in the format. And you were kind of hard pressed to want to play another fair creature based deck because you just couldn't realistically keep up with this deck. So let's start thinking about our white X, or X is other colors, creature decks. So blue-black Riskaminator, that is the blue-black tempo deck list featuring cards like Grief and Reanimate, is going to be all over the place. And a lot of times, fair white decks could just not keep up with the speed of Turbo Muxus, and now they don't have to. So I might expect a slight uptick in fair Swords to Plowshares based decks. Now, Death and Taxes enthusiasts, your matchup spread is maybe not going to be the greatest in the world still, but I think there is a lot of hope for slower decks like Death and Taxes and Maverick to be reasonable players moving forward. because Swords to Plowshares does a really good job of just cleanly answering some cards in this format so that they don't just come back later. For example, Troll of Khazad-dûm is something that you see in a lot of these decks that contain Grief. And this does a good job of dodging some removal cards that might otherwise see a lot of play in Legacy. You know, this doesn't eat a Lightning Bolt. This doesn't eat an Abrupt Decay. It doesn't eat a lot of other red-based removal. But Swords to Plowshares just tells this, or Grief, or Atraxa, or whatever to just get out of the way. For the Magic Online gamers here, though, some of the cards that are seeing play in Death and Taxes just aren't viable online because they don't exist. The Fallout cards have never been put on Magic Online, and they may or may not end up getting there eventually. But Pre-War Farmaware, for example, is a great way to have some recursion while also just like coming with a +2/+2 and vigilance alongside it. Like this is a relatively strong piece of equipment, and this card may end up getting better in Modern Horizons 3. I don't remember whether or not the card that I'm referencing is leaked or spoiled, so I'm going to save that discussion for another day, but this is a very powerful card that the deck doesn't have access to on Magic Online. So while I think we're going to see a natural uptick in white Swords to Plowshare decks, I'm not sure if Death and Taxes is going to be the best way to go about that online. Aether Vial is not a card that I'm super excited to be playing in Legacy anymore. The amount of time it takes you to get this set up and get this going and really get your advantage out of it, it feels so much slower than it used to be, because threats in the format now look like Murktide Regent that will just kill you in a couple of turns, right? It's not the control deck hacking you to death with Snapcaster Mage over 10 turns anymore. It's 2 or 3 hits from an Uro or a Murktide Regent and you die. Name Sticker Goblin exiting the format means that you have a lot more time versus some decks, but, you know, 4th Airlingas kill you in 2 turns is still very much a thing that you're going to have to respect. So there's something here for these white decks. I'm not sure if it's Death and Taxes in particular. Now, there's one thing that I'm going to expect to see less of, and that is red Storm decks. Some people like Killer Bee recently have been working on a mono red Storm deck list with some things like Molten Duplication, Dual Caster Mage, and there's just like the tiniest possible bit of blue in there for Echo of Eons. And that deck was just starting to get into the refined territory, and losing Name Sticker Goblin probably kills that deck. Like, it was a very big portion of what's going on there. The ability to just have this large burst of mana that maybe could be copied again later with Molten Duplication. Losing that probably sets that deck back to fringe playable at best, rather than something that like maybe could work its way towards being competitive. So let's talk about other fair decks that kind of got pushed out of the metagame by Turbo Muxus, and I think a big one of those is Initiative. Initiative has existed in this weird spot in the last couple of years where it's either garbage or one of the best things to be doing in the format. And the Turbo Muxus deck was largely just outspeeding the Initiative deck in terms of raw goldfishing speed, which is impressive because Forge into Trap gets people dead very quickly. For the Ancient Tomb gamers out there, one of the things to figure out in the next couple of weeks is Initiative better than just playing a Moon Stompy deck list? And my initial thought, just based on gut feeling, is that I probably want to be blood mooning people rather than messing around with the higher CMC threats of the Initiative deck. Like, I think I just want to play something lean and low to the ground, especially while people are probably going to be removing some number of Hydroblasts because you won't need them as much. I think I want to stay on the like consistent mono red train, but this is territory that is worth exploring again. And this is another one of those times where I think we should put some numbers on it. Like Initiative Stompy right now is like 1% of the format. This is absolutely tiny in terms of number. Initiative Stompy 1%, Maverick 1%. A lot of these slightly slower aggro decks are just at a fraction of what they used to be. And Turbo Muxus existing in the format and kind of pushing these out is a big portion of that. Maverick is maybe starting to rebound a little bit even before this banning is taken into account. But a lot of these other fair, yeah, I mean, this is another fair white deck. This is usually not a Swords to Plowshares deck, or if it is a Swords to Plowshares deck, they're in the sideboard. A lot of these fair white decks kind of took a hit for a very long time. And I think the last kind of major set of category, the last major category of decks that I think are going to improve are things that just could not keep up with the Goldfish speed of the Turbo Muxus deck. The Turbo Muxus deck is technically capable of killing on turn 1, although it's pretty unlikely. And turn 3, or sometimes even turn 2 kills were not uncommon. And so if your deck took a couple of turns to set up, be that via cantrips, be that via tutors, sometimes you just didn't have the raw speed to keep up with that deck. And so maybe some decks that were forced out because of speed now have a chance to come back into play. And this is a broad enough category that I don't want to go and list out a whole bunch of decks. But if you were playing something that was just a bit too slow for the format previously, maybe revisit your deck. There are still some powerful bars that you have to pass, right? Like Grief Reanimate deck is currently Grief Reanimate deck. Grief Reanimate that thing and lose 2 cards from your starting hand is still a bar that you're going to have to pass in Legacy. And there are still other very fast combo decks in the format. Think the Epic Storm style decks that can win via, Beseech the Mirror or some strange Echo of Eons lines very early on. So, you still need to be doing something powerful, but again, you have a little bit more breathing room than you did previously. Ooh, all right. This is fun. I am excited about this change. So, as of this morning, if you asked me what are the pillars of Legacy right now, I would have mentioned black Orcish Bowmaster Grief decks. I would have mentioned multicolor Up the Beanstalk controls decks, and I would have mentioned Ancient Tomb decks with a real emphasis on Name Sticker Goblin. And now the Name Sticker Goblin portion of that is removed. I think Ancient Tomb is still going to be a very strong pillar of the format. Urza Saga is still a card that exists. Ancient Tomb Chalice, Ancient Tomb Blood Moon, those are still powerful things to be doing. But now there's a little bit more time for other decks to get involved and set up, and we'll see how the metagame share shifts. The Up the Beanstalk decks can maybe spend a little bit less of their energy removing creatures with Namesticker Goblin out of the format. Maybe that opens up a couple of either main deck or sideboard slots for them to improve against other things. I don't play them enough to know exactly what their matchup spread is like, but maybe they can improve some of their matchups just a little bit and tip the needle in their favor. I haven't been following the data super closely, but a lot of times when I look at Up the Beanstalk decks, despite feeling very good when they are doing their thing, a lot of times their overall win percentage is only somewhere on the order of 50%, which is nothing really to write home about. So maybe those Up the Beanstalk decks can improve a little bit. I guess the thing to be worried about here is does the whole Grief Reanimate scam package, as is maybe best used in the blue-black tempo, blue-black Rescaminator deck list, does that shell just now become overpowering with one of the other big pillars of the format being knocked down a peg? Does that deck just get better and get to the point where it does get oppressive? That we won't know for a little while, but we are about to get a massive shakeup in Modern Horizons 3. So despite the fact that I love Sticker Goblin, Sticker Goblin got me a bunch of Magic Online trophies. I really enjoyed playing with the card. I'm I'm excited that it's gone because now we get a little shakeup before we get Modern Horizons 3. And I'm looking forward to looking at the next set of challenges and seeing how the format has changed. So, folks, I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Let me know what you kind of thought about the video format, whether you want these 4 bannings moving forward. And as far as my gameplay goes, the video that I will release the day after this one will be content from before the bannings, and then everything else I release starting later this week will be post-banning content. Now, did I go out of town for a couple of days and stop recording? Yes, absolutely. Did that work in my advantage this time? It sure did. All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed. Have a wonderful rest of the day. See ya.